Hello, Joe Wright here, and I've been making a series of videos to share with my descendants and friends. And one of the frustrating things that I've pointed out in my past videos is that I know so little about the people before me, including my grandparents. Two that died before I was born, and two that one lived in Athens, Greece. He was a grumpy old man that I really didn't get to know. My parents generally didn't share a lot about him, and he didn't share a lot about his own experiences. And my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side, my grandfather was an alcoholic and was very old when I came around. And a lot of times he was just drunk, and I didn't really get to know him that much. I've inherited a whole bunch of pictures and Super 8 movies from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and then some. And I've been putting them together in a series of videos that I want my descendants to be able to know my experiences as much as the people before me, so that they can enjoy the heritage that they have. You know, it's interesting. I have a great-great-grandfather, Christopher Columbus Wright, who lived in a slave state in southern Missouri, surrounded by those that were very supportive of the Confederacy and breaking away from the Union. Yet he served in the Union Army, survived the entire war, and died of alcoholism at the very end of it. And other than that, I know nothing about all his stories and experiences that I just wish I could know about. And even those boring experiences, the people before me, I would love to know what everyday life was. So I'm putting together these videos and I'm theming them. And today I want to share the parties that my parents and my relatives and their friends had, what I had when I was growing up. Now, for young people today, they do everything by sending emails, FaceTiming, and really not getting together like how it was when I was a kid. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the entertainment was getting together and having parties on the weekends. My parents were masters of having parties. It's something that we had around all the time. They'd invite their friends. They made friends so easily. And I had lifelong experiences of adults and their children coming to our house or us going to their house that brought rich, incredible memories. What was so nice, especially as being a teenager when you're going through some challenging times, to be surrounded by adults who care, who watch out for you, that are guiding you, that are behind you. It was like having an army of friends and family that were just supportive of me, and I want to share those experiences with you. So here we go. Most of these parties that I'm going to share with you at this time revolve around three families. One, my parents. This is my father, my stepfather, my mom. These are my two stepbrothers. These are my godparents, Alice and Joe Pearl. They lived next door to us behind me, and I was named after Joe Pearl. So this is my parents. This is my aunt and uncle, and they are the most amazing people. This is my cousins, Larry and Laura. And my aunt and uncle were just amazing people, and we had a ton of parties on the weekends, exchanging back and forth between their two families. This is the Eggers, and they were a big part of our family. I believe how my father met Jim is that they were both carpenters. I could be wrong about that, but a lot of the family friends that we had were generally tradesmen that worked in housing, construction business, and most were blue collars. There were a few that had college degrees, but generally it was just blue collar families, and they were just good people. And growing up having these three families, we exchanged having parties at the three houses. In fact, these are the three houses right here. This is my parents' house. This is the first house that I was born in. I'm not going to be sharing much of the stories of that. The house is now gone. In fact, the entire neighborhood is now gone because the expansion of the St. Louis Lambert Airport took over the entire neighborhood. bulldoze the houses. The second house is on Bartow Lane in Calverton Park, which is now Hazelwood. And the third house, and this was my favorite house, and I'm going to actually be doing a video on places where I lived in, buildings that changed my life. This was the Pueblo House in Florissant, and when we moved here, I thought we were rich. I didn't realize that we were just middle class and maybe even lower middle class. But with the poor circumstances that came from with the first house I showed you, which was a shed converted to a house, I felt like we were really rich. And I didn't really realize that until I was like in my teenage high school years. The third house, this is the Zell's house. This is my aunt and uncle's house. We were over here at this house, and they had a house before this too, which we did a lot of parties, but this is the one that the core house, that the most parties that we had over here. So many happy memories at these three homes and three families. So this first one is New Year's Eve. This is when we first moved into the Pueblo house. And it was, you notice everybody's wearing Sunday suits, clothing, which was pretty unusual at that time. But I believe this was the first New Year's that we had here, and everybody was invited over the house, basically to show it off. It was a tiny house. I believe it was only 1,200 square feet in area. My house today is 3 times that, but I can tell you, the love and the parties that occurred in this tiny house and these tiny rooms. I'll talk about a little bit later how small the rooms were, how we crammed everybody in these tiny rooms, and so much love and happiness occurred in them. So here's Bill Winslow, Jim Agar, and my stepfather, Ron Hall. The party was also downstairs, and my parents went to a lot of effort to do the decorations downstairs. And this tells a lot about my parents. Anybody they ran into that was halfway decent, they were friends for life with them. This is my neighbor, Leo Leibel, and his wife, Ann. There's another picture of them. You can see the men are all gathered over here, and the women are gathered over here. By the way, this is the last time we ever had a party with everybody being dressed up for it. And the next picture here is the women, and this is Ann, our next door neighbor, Leibel. And what a wonderful person. This was the only time Mrs. Mendoza came over. This is the first Hispanic family that I ever met. They were well educated. They were better off than everybody in the neighborhood. And this is Maisie, our next door neighbor from Berkeley on the Alpha House. The Edgar sisters, oh my gosh, I had such a crush on all 3 of them. When I was a little boy. I didn't understand what those feelings were, but I just thought they were so pretty, and I just loved being around them. But I really didn't know how to act around them, so I acted kind of like an idiot. What a little boy does. So this is Brenda, Melinda, and Karen. The next picture you're going to see, and this is our living room. This is Jim, their brother, and this is my cousin Larry, Uncle Harlan, Jim, my father, Ron, I should say. This guy, I don't know who he is, but he was probably one of the tradesmen, probably a carpenter. I'll stop it right here. Falstaff beer, which doesn't exist anymore. It originated in St. Louis in 1903. By the 1960s, it was the 3rd largest brewery in the United States. And then it just basically disappeared. It was considered a man's beer. It was kind of, my impression is that it was a poor man's beer. You can see the cans over here. Now, I forgot all about this beer. It no longer exists. But when I saw that little emblem right there, it immediately brought me back to my childhood. And I did some research, and this is what I found out about it. But it brought back memories. So here's the party going on. The women are gathered in the dining room of our Pueblo house. And I think, here we go. We'll stop right here and I'll start giving names. So this is Lois. This is Jim's and Karen's mother right here. This is Ambush. She became a family friend because our neighbor next door, her mom lived right next door to us in Berkeley. And They were lifelong friends until they both died. They were pretty much at every party, and you're going to see them often. And this is Sharon Pearl, was neighbor, and that's Alice, her mother-in-law. This is a Halloween party in 1968. That's me, the Indian there. The bum's Roger. Larry's the astronaut, and that's Laura, my cousins. Trooper, their dog. I wish we had films of all the parties we had. It seemed like every 2 or 3 weeks that we'd have a party. This is my father, and when I say my father, he's actually my stepfather, but I consider him my father. It's me that's standing up right there with the bowl hair shape. This is Brenda. I'll stop it right here. Who is the daughter of Ann Bush, which is sitting on the other side. Sad story. Her and I were good friends. We grew up together, and she had incredible toys in her basement, and we would go back and forth to each other's house and during these parties. Then one day, her father and mother got a divorce, and her father took her to Arizona, and I never saw her again. And it's just really broke my heart. I've wondered what happened to her, but she was just a really dear childhood friend. So that's me. There's Rodney in the back, standing behind my father. Of course, I'm going to be irritating here in this picture. I was either 8 or 9 years old in this picture. I just love this picture. My dad just loved my mom so much. He cherished her. It's Maisie. Maisie lived in our house here's our house that I was initially raised in. And Alice Pearl lived behind us with her husband, Joe Pearl, and that are my my godparents. And Maisie lived next door to us just to the right of us. And all the homes in this neighborhood were generally pretty rundown, pretty poor. We're a poor middle class, maybe upper or lower class. But Maisie's house was just beautiful. It was probably built in the 1920s. And it was what we called a dollhouse. It was just so cute with all the decorations and furniture inside. It was just perfect. Here is Ann Bush, and that's her husband. That's the only picture I have. And he's the one that took Brenda Bush when they divorced to Arizona. We never saw her again or heard from her. And this is Alice. At this point, her husband had died, and that was my first death that I really had. And it really killed me because they basically raised me at some point. Biological father, who was just too drunk and all the time just dropped down alcoholic, had to leave the house, which I'll talk in another film about. But Alice stepped in when my mother found a job, and she babysat me, took me to school, Springdale Elementary, which no longer exists. And this was my first communion, and she came to it. She was all the important events. She died soon after this. After her husband died, she was never the same. The life just seemed to be sucked out of her. And you're going to see Sharon Pearl in these pictures. That's her. Oh, there's me. Sharon will be coming up in the video here in just a few minutes. Yeah, that irritating kid. Not much has changed with my personality today. Still irritating. I look around. This is Thanksgiving dinner. That's our cat, Mamika. Our first 2 cats had all Greek names because my mom was from Athens, Greece. And as I look at this picture here, it just brings up so many happy memories to see all the knickknacks and even the dishware and everything that's in there. This is Rodney and Carolyn. So I'm going to stop it right here. The smiles that you see here kind of hide the truth that it was really hard blending 2 families together. This was a party at my sister's and her husband's house, Jay Hall. Eventually, my sister and him got divorced. This is his parents right here, but just talking about how my parents are just amazing people. They didn't let a divorce hurt their friendships with the Halls, and even after the divorce, Colonel Hall and his wife, I don't remember their first names, but I just remember Colonel Hall. They were at our house for years and years until either they passed away or moved away. I can't recall. But they were wonderful people. And I wanted you to look at the hairdo of my mom there. This time period, the 60s, big hair, tall hair was really a big thing at the time. That's my sister. What's make me appreciate this, as her kid brother, I thought Carolyn, I didn't think she was pretty as a kid. I thought she was irritating big sister, but looking at these pictures here, I didn't realize, being her little brother, just how pretty that she was. So it's great to see these pictures. So here you're wondering what it is. I did some research on it. Probably the ladies recognize it's a hair dryer, which was really popular. I saw on the Super 8 movie that we just looked at, I saw this image right here, and I turned it upside down and zoomed in on it. I was able to get enough information to find the exact color and model that my sister got, and this was how women dried their hair back then. Blow dryers really weren't much in existence in the homes anyway, and moms and daughters would pull these things up and put curlers in their hair, and this is what they're doing. And it was noisy, and it took a lot of time for your hair to dry. So this is my aunt and uncle here, and I just love this picture. They loved each other so much, and they were such an inspiration to us. What a good marriage and family life is. So this is a Halloween party. I believe my sister's the one who put this together, because it's the only Halloween party you ever had, and that's me, the annoying kid. So this right here, I'm going to stop it just to give some background. I've put here that this is when the Zell family moved to St. Louis. I'm not sure if that's completely accurate, but my Aunt Mary wanted to be with family, and so she told Uncle Harlan that she wanted to eventually end up in St. Louis so she could be with her sister, my mom. And those two were inseparable. And Aunt Mary was, even though she was the younger sister, she was more street smart than my mom, and was always the one that was, kind of the leader out of the two of them. She took good care of my mother. But they were looking for a house, and I can't remember if this is when Uncle Harlan went to Vietnam, and they stayed with us briefly until they found a house, or that they were moving from one house to another, and at the last house that they were in. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. There's Uncle Harlan. There's the two sisters. There's their dog, although I think we all considered Trooper our dog because he was such an amazing fixture in both our homes. That's Larry, my cousin. Laura she has her eyes covered, and you'll see a lot of people squinting because the light for Super 8 movies was like looking into the sun. It was very bright. And here they're getting ready to go to bed. And I believe we're going to stop the film here. This kitchen at this house, I didn't realize how tiny it was until I was looking at some of these pictures and films. But as a kid, this was the heart of our family. My mother and I love cooking with my mother. And I love just cooking too. She's the one that really got me into cooking, and generally I really love just preparing meals. It's kind of like a chemistry set to me. But I just want you to look how small it is. Roughly, here's the stove. This is the only counter space right here. There's a little counter over here, but it's almost non-existent. This is maybe 12 square feet. We're looking at Tokyo standards for kitchens. The only reason that this would not be a typical kitchen in Tokyo, Japan, is because there's American-sized appliances. So you got an American-sized gas oven over here, an American-sized refrigerator. But so much happened in this kitchen, so much love. My mom preparing food and me preparing food for the family at times, in particular for my parents. I just really loved doing it. Anyway, it's about 10 square feet now. This is my bedroom and Roger's bedroom. Laura is in my bed. Larry is in Roger's bed. That was a typical thing to do when visitors come to stay at your house, is that you give up your bed and you let them be the guest of honor and you go sleep on the floor or elsewhere. Roger and I probably slept on the floor in the living room, which we probably thought nothing of. In fact, probably thought it was cool to do. This is Larry and Laura's Zell birthday. This is around 1968. Here's the participants in it. There's me, there's Maisie and Ann Bush, which they're at almost every party. Rodney, my mom, Carolyn. You can see the cakes, one pink cake for Laura and one blue one for Larry. Looks like they're 5 years old if I'm counting the candles, right? And so this was a typical get-together where it'd just be impromptu. One mom would call Aunt Mary would call my mom and say, hey, let's get together this Saturday night, and you bring this, I'll prepare this. And we just exchanged these parties at each other's houses. And again, so many happy memories. It was awesome to have adults around me that cared about me, that acted as second parents and kept me in line. And there's my sister Carolyn in that galley kitchen, that tiny little kitchen. So much love in that kitchen. Oh, Mom, I miss you so much. My Aunt Mary was always the heart of the parties. She was always laughing, always joking around and laughing. Okay, this is another party around 1969, 70 or so. There's Carolyn and her then husband, Jay. So I'll stop it right there. It looks like Larry's carrying a Daisy BB gun. And I say that because he's having a hard time cocking it. And those Daisy air rifles, BB guns, were very hard for small kids to pump. I should tell this generation, back then, every boy had a BB gun. And in my house, as a childhood house, we all had BB guns, and we shot up everything, including windows that I'm embarrassed to say that we shouldn't have. And at times, we had to have our BB guns taken away from us for sometimes like months because of the misbehaving. Fortunately, we didn't shoot each other. Actually, we did shoot each other, but nobody's eyes got shot out. And this is in our living room at Pueblo. There's Laura. Nicholas, that's our cat that she's holding. Oh, he was an awesome cat. And we're going to stop this here in just a second. This is Sue Field. This was Carolyn's best friend from high school. They hung out together and they were lifelong friends. Sue has just recently passed away a few years ago. This was her parents. He was a chemist. He was basically everybody that came over our house tended to be tradesmen, blue-collar workers. This was my first introduction to a professional in our family circle. And they were wonderful people. You can see how they were dressed very nicely. What I thought was so cool, Sue in the summers would go work at her father's company, and she was in charge of washing all the chemistry bottles and that. And she'd bring home all these chemistry bottles and give them to me, test tubes and things like that, because I was really, really into science. And I just loved her, and she was always joking around. Great sense of humor. And this is in our dining room. And this dining room was tiny. Everybody's sitting around. Basically, it was hard to move around anybody. There's Larry, and this is Bill Winslow. I'm going to just turn that back to Bill Winslow. This guy, this is one of many adults in my parents' family circle that watched over me. When my godfather died, I took it really hard because he was like a second father to me. In fact, he was more of a father to me than my biological father, Albert, right? And he stepped up to the plate, took me under his arm. He bought me a tie tack or a tie bar that had a W on it, which I kept forever because I just thought it was so wonderful. And he gave me a few other things, but we had a number of parties over at his house, him and his wife, Dorothy Winslow, and they were just very generous to me. In fact, at one point, I was looking at living in their little unit that they had, a little, like a accessory unit in the back of their house that as an adult, I was going to actually move into that to kind of step up, moving away from home. That's Dorothy. She was hilarious. And I thought she was such a classy lady, too, on top of that. This is Christmas Day, 1973-74. This is in our living room. My sister looks like she got some new boots. This was my sister-in-law to Rodney, my stepbrother. This was his first wife. There's Rodney. Oh, so I'm looking at all the knickknacks around the room and the furnishings. It was a white Christmas, and you can see this is a picture from that time period. This is our living room, and it was a tiny room. This is my sister, my brother-in-law. I really like this guy. Him and I really hit it off. I'm known for not smiling in any pictures. That's something that family members, my wife in particular, I just can't smile unless somebody makes me laugh. It just doesn't, for some reason, just doesn't work. So that's Nicholas, our cat. That was the second cat we ever got. That's Snoopy, our first dog, first and only dog that we ever had while we were at that house. He lived forever. This was the second house that we lived in, just briefly, but my parents never sold it. They just rented it out. And my sister at one time lived in that house, Carolyn. The Zells briefly lived in this house. A lot of happy memories there. My brother Rodney, stepbrother Rodney, lived in this house briefly. And my parents eventually moved back to this house. Broke my heart when they sold the Pueblo house and moved back to this house, but they just wanted something smaller. And my mom, this is a concrete deck that she had in the front yard. And what was so cute about my mom is that she always would put a woman's touch on everything. And she had little outfits for this duck to wear. And one of them was a little rain outfit and a little rain cap to wear. And so when it rained, she'd put the rain gear on the duck. Gosh, I miss my mom. But this is some of the many parties that my parents had at this house. During the summertime, it was out in the patio area. It was a humble home, tiny house. I believe it was probably 800 square feet. It only had 2 bedrooms and a very tiny kitchen. So much of the activities were almost always out in this patio area. And you can see my wife, Lori. This is, here's Lacey, our daughter. That's me, Uncle Harlan, Rodney, Jerry Jansen. This is my dad's cousins. I thought Jerry was such a beautiful, beautiful woman. Beautiful woman. I just admired, and she's aged so gracefully and still a beautiful woman. Rick Olin was my best friend in elementary school, junior high, and we kept in touch over the years. And like my parents would often do, My friends' parents would often become part of our party circle, and the Owens were at a number of our parties. This is actually one of the pictures that we were over at the Zell's house. We have parties over there all the time, and this is at the Zell's kitchen. Good people. And then this is my cousin Larry. So here's the Edgars, and I wanted to say this isn't at any of the houses. They just went out with my parents to eat, and I just really love this family. I just always thought he was such a handsome man. Even in his older age, he just really looked good. When I was a little kid, I just loved how he styled his hair, and he had a little curl that he would put in his. I don't know how he kept it there, but I tried so hard to comb my hair like his to get that little bump that he had on it, but I just thought he was so cool. I think in another life he might have been a movie star. This is the Hammonds. Just lovely people, these two. Again, these are adults that watched out for me, loved me, took care of me. I consider them like aunt and uncles to me. Fred Kincaid, another adult. He was a big part of my teenage years when I was getting my pilot's license, working towards getting my pilot's license. He worked for Ozark Airlines, and he was very supportive and was always asking how I'm doing, how did I pass the test, the FAA test, the written examination. And when I told him that I passed him, I saw him at church on Sunday, and he was in the hallway, and I said, "Hey, Fred, guess what? I passed my FAA test, written test." And he was really happy, and I told him I was going to tell my, who we call Brother Schwinder, who was somebody who was giving me flight training. He told me, he goes, "You haven't heard, have you?" And I go, "No, I haven't." And he goes, "He died the other day. He was in a restaurant." And it was just devastating, and he was there to comfort me, and he was just really cool. And the teenagers, pretty much all of us teenagers that hung out with his daughter, Lydia, he was, we considered him cool, really liked him, because he would talk to us, treat us like adults. Here's Elna Nelson. She was so awesome and such a big part of my life. I just admired her. She would talk about California all the time, growing up in Hollywood, and tell stories of just how warm it would be and beautiful during the wintertime there, and how athletic everybody was and always outdoors. And I wanted to move to California because I heard it. Years later, like 50 years later, I emailed her and asked her what address that she was living at, and she gave me the address. And Lori and I were going out to Hollywood to see a filming of a show, and we stopped there, and I got a picture of myself in front of her house, her childhood house. This is the Mayfields, really cool people. They had two daughters that we hung out with. Sister Mayfield was always at the dances, chaperoning dances. And I would ask her from time to time to dance with me because I thought she was really cool. And she would. She'd get out there and dance with me on the floor. Here's more people. The Writers, their son Jim was one of two best friends I had during high school with Harry Mobley. Howard Nelson, that was Elna Nelson's husband. These people over here are friends of my family that I didn't know. There's my father. I want to emphasize that he's my father, even though he was my stepfather. This guy was an incredible father to me. And here's the Mayfields over here. And this is in the dining room of the Bartow house. That when the parties were smaller, get-togethers were in their tiny little living room and dining room. Here's the Writers. Jim Ryder, one of two best friends from high school. This is wife. And I guess they took turns who was out of the picture and who was in the picture, and so that everybody could be in both these pictures. Here's the Kings. His daughter, Melanie, was just an incredible person. Got to know her better when we were at college at BYU, but I just loved her parents. And one thing to point out, nearly every man that you see in this videos served either in World War II or in the Korean War, and they never talked about it, their service, because that generation just didn't. But some of them saw some brutal fighting, including my biologic father, Albert Wright, and never talked about it. So here's where we say goodbye, my sister Laura and Maisie Pearl. That concludes the parties at the Wright, Sells, and Eggers homes. Love you guys. Happy trails.